Next are 5 outstanding change makers representing a number of leading Connecticut companies: Bigelow Tea, Otis Elevators, Medtronic, and InCord. This morning's conversation is moderated by CBIA's board member, Moy Ogilvie, managing partner for McCarter and English Hartford office. Moy, good morning.
Good morning, Beatrice. Thank you very much. We are all really excited to continue the discussion that's been going on this morning. I know we are all inspired by what we've heard so far from all of the speakers. So thank you to CBIA for continuing this conference, even in this remote way. And we are all ready for this discussion. It's going to be informative. There will not be enough time because these women are all phenomenal, but we're going to get through as much as we can. And if there are time for questions at the end, we will do those. So today's panel, we are going to focus really on the past year, what 2020 and beyond has taught us about leadership. And these women are going to share some of their experiences at their corporations and businesses. So let me just briefly introduce the panelists. I will beg you to look at their bios. They are so extremely impressive, but I'm just going to highlight their names and titles right now, but please take a minute and look at their bios if you have not when we are done with this program today. So first we have Cindi Bigelow, who is the president and CEO of Bigelow Teeth. And I think everyone knows or should know they are the U.S. market leader in specialty teas, and they are also a family-owned business for many generations. We also have with us Robin Fiala, who is the vice president of sales and marketing of Otis. And also everyone should know that Otis is the global leader in making and installing elevators and escalators. We also have Valerie Finarty, who is the vice president operations and surgical innovations for Medtronic, which is one of the largest medical device companies in the world. And then last but not least, we have Meredith Shay, who is the CEO of InCord, which is the largest manufacturer of custom safety netting in North America. And Meredith is so beyond impressive. She became CEO of this company around the age or just before the age of 30. So kudos to her. And all of these women are impressive. And we're going to get going and talk a little bit more about this past year. And first, we just want to talk about characteristics of leaders during the time of crisis. And if you could all share what you think are some characteristics that leaders had to use and show during the time of crisis. Either you displayed it or you saw other leaders do it well. If you could just share, and anybody can go first.
I'm happy to go first if you'd like. First of all, ladies, it's a pleasure to have an opportunity to be with you this morning and chat and share some stories. I'm sure we have more similar stories than we could ever imagine. For me, it was, several lessons learned about what was the qualities needed. First one was patience. I think we needed to know when we needed to act and when we needed to listen more. But besides patience, there was really, for me during the crisis, the ability to really reassess at a faster speed than anything I could imagine. We were putting plans in place, and within 3 hours, those plans really had run its course, and now you needed to change plans. And so, patience, reassessment, listening, and then I guess the last one I would really say is you can't panic. They can't see you at all, not being able to deal with everything that's coming your way. And so for me, it was really showing a steady hand and really leading the ship, although reassessing and moving in a lot of different directions, really showing that we're going to be okay.
Thanks, Cindi. Anyone else?
Hi. Go ahead, Robin. Sorry, this is Robin, and again, I feel very honored to be here with these women on this panel, as well as to share with you some of our stories at Otis. It's been a phenomenal year for us. In addition to managing through a pandemic, we also spun out from United Technologies and become our own publicly traded company that's caused us to, in many ways, do a lot of what, Cindi just described. And maybe just a couple of the additional leadership traits that I would just maybe suggest is really truly listening. I think a lot of us think we listen, but I think it's taught us to listen and engage with not just our employees, but our customers, and in our case, our writing public, in ways that we never, maybe had to in the past. I think it's also taught us to really be agile and flexible, and move, as Cindi said, at a pace that one could never imagine in the past. And then finally, I'll just talk about sort of being innovative, right? We've had to think about creative and new solutions for problems that, a week ago hadn't existed, right? So we had to kind of really think outside the box and really leverage, I think, a lot of different levers than perhaps we had to in the past.
Great. Thanks, Robin.
Thanks. Just a couple things to add to that, if I may. Hello, everyone. Hello, Moy. Thanks for having me. I would just add that, this was a very different type of crisis, right? So most of us, our whole lives, we've dealt with various, crises, right? For me personally, it might be a tornado or a hurricane or a major supplier disruption. But I think in the past year, the crises have been different because it's impacted more than maybe brick and mortar plants, right? For operations, at least. It's impacted our team members, their families, whole communities in ways that I think previous crises haven't. And so, some of the things that I had to do differently was really think through empathy and putting myself in the shoes of some of our team members and what they were going through maybe at home or in their community. So I think empathy was a big one. And the other one was really communication, honing those communication skills, because that was really critical. People wanted to hear from their leaders. The messages may be really tough and in some cases not what they wanted to hear, but really bringing forth facts in a humble and truthful way, I think was appreciated and helped establish trust long-term.
That's great. Meredith, anything to add?
Yeah, I realized with how rapidly everything was changing that we needed a framework for decision making. And as a leader, if I led by having decisions made out of love instead of fear, and could allow the rest of our company to make decisions that way, we'd have a way to make decisions that everybody could be happy with the end results, knowing that we did it in that way. And it was the best we could do with the information that we had at the time.
Thank you. And thank you all for just sharing some of those ideas, because we could have a whole discussion just on that alone, but I think for the attendees, I think it's just helpful for them to hear from you all some of the characteristics that you had to have or that you've seen that are really helpful at times of crisis. But let's go into a little bit about some of examples of some of the general challenges that you all had in terms of running your business and keeping your workforce going over the past year. And again, whoever wants to start first.
I could start. My father passed away on March 8th of 2020. He was the owner of the company. So in addition to pretty tragic circumstances, we had a company without an owner and had to pretty quickly adapt to a changing environment with the pandemic, as well as a changing environment for a company. During those first 2 weeks, I have a 1 and 3-year-old. So I learned pretty quickly that they weren't going to be returning to school after spring break. And so those were some pretty significant challenges that we saw within the first 2 weeks of everything happening that we had to address as a company, as a family, as owners of business.
No, thank you for sharing that. And I know on behalf of all of us, we send condolences for your loss, but thank you for sharing that. Definitely.
I'll provide a little perspective on, just from a manufacturing standpoint. I think our biggest challenge is because we make, life-saving equipment and medical equipment. We had to, keep going, right? So whereas some businesses might have been able to kind of shift, which we did, for a good portion of our business, but in manufacturing, we had to quickly pivot to being able to maintain operations and ensuring we had a very safe work environment for our employees. So that was probably the biggest challenge, right? In our factories, we had to very quickly get personal protective equipment, which was in short supply. We had to do social distancing, so we had to lay out some of our lines. We had to do screening, right, and contact tracing. And so that was probably some of the biggest challenges to keep, the factories running. But you also had to make sure that your workforce still wanted to come to work, right? So you had to make sure that we would communicate effectively that it was going to be a safe environment, that they could come into work, and all the things that we were putting in place. So from an operations perspective, those were probably the biggest challenges. And then there's a whole nother set of challenges, maybe somebody else can touch on from a working from home and virtual work.
For myself, first of all, Meredith, I'm very sorry. No matter what I say today in terms of what I had to deal with, I can't even imagine what you had to go through, to be honest. That's at a whole nother level. But, for me, I think, I can relate to what you're saying about manufacturing and then having an office as well and blending that. And I think what I really learned early on is that, again, we were talking about you're used to tornadoes or whatever you're dealing with in your businesses. All of a sudden, all of us were dealing with an emotional spectrum that we have never seen before. Of all the things we deal with, I think they're usually business forward. And in this particular case, we were dealing with emotions that covered. And so we would have, the manufacturing team, we have 400 employees. And 300 of them are in manufacturing. So we need to create that safe environment and bring them in during times where they were receiving tremendous pressure from the press, their family, their own particular fears. At the same time, in the office, again, same pressures. And you really had to try to look at all of the emotions and then try to base it on, yes, empathy. And I appreciate what Meredith said about love, but also facts and bringing everybody sort of into a center spot. That was very difficult to do, especially early on. It's still difficult to do, but it was really challenging at the beginning. And so for me, when you ask, what is the, I learned about myself, I learned that I thought humility was important. Humility is essential. Because as soon as you think you have the answer, you didn't have the answer anymore. So I guess it was really reinforcing, I would say, at the beginning of COVID and where we are today. Humility is the biggest characteristic that I've learned. That you need to really think about that even at a higher level.
No, that's great. Humility is essential. Yeah, definitely. Robin, anything else to add with regard to challenges that you faced with your company?
Yeah, I mean, maybe the one thing that I would just add is that, with our 60,000 employees around the world, the challenges we faced, while very similar in each country, definitely had its unique differences for a variety of different reasons. What our employees faced in the local markets, and we have employees, both in the office and in factories, but also a significant number of our employees, essential workers on the front line, installing and servicing equipment and infrastructures like hospitals, et cetera. So we had to, figure out ways to really quickly mobilize those folks, make sure that they were safe, make sure they had the proper PPE, and in over 150 countries and territories around the world, which each posed its own unique requirements, challenges, struggles. So I think that was one of the things that, let's say, certainly early on in the pandemic, that was critical for us and critical for for our customers, and really figuring out how to deal with that and collaborate and support each other, and really have not just the empathy, but the leadership and ownership to help make it all happen. So again, I think, the organization learned a lot, and really supporting and acting more as a global enterprise than, sort of really trying to kind of go fight these fires, singularly on their own.
No, thank you for that. And also, I think it's great, and you all touched on it, the idea that so many of you have as workers, the frontline workers, the essential workers, the ones who had to be there to keep the companies and businesses going, while many of us were able to do what we did from our homes, or certainly places where we could guarantee our safety a little bit more. So it's important that you all mentioned that and the challenges of that. And obviously you all did it well and did it successfully. One thing, and we've heard this all morning, and this is a conference about women and for women. So let's talk about even more about the pandemic's impact on women. And there's a lot of data that's out there that shows that many of the jobs that were lost were women's jobs. Many women work in the leisure, hospitality, retail, all those things that shut down, frankly, right? And so that on one level was a huge loss in terms of work opportunities. And then also, as Wendy mentioned earlier, there was the McKinsey reports. And McKinsey reports really looked how women in corporate America have been impacted during the pandemic. And I'll just read the quote. And again, it was talked a little bit about this morning, but the pandemic had a near immediate effect on women's employment. 1 in 4 women are considering leaving the workforce or downshifting their careers versus 1 in 5 men. While all women have been impacted, 3 major groups have experienced some of the largest challenges: working mothers, women in senior management, and Black women. So going from there, I just want to talk a little bit about what you all experienced in terms of leading your workforce and the challenges that really came to the forefront, in particular for women, right? Women who have children, women who were taking on the brunt of elder care, and parents in general, of course. And just let's talk a little bit more deeper about that. So in your companies, what did you see and how did you help your employees navigate? Who wants to go first?
I'm just laughing that Robin has 60,000 employees and we have 400, and how is she ever going to end? Okay, that's a tough one with 60,000 employees. Even with 400, it was a tough one to try to address. And I guess for me, we try to look at, again, we're so much smaller, really, than both, Robin and Valerie's company, for sure, in terms of number of employees and the global impact, et cetera. But we just try to listen to each case individually. And again, it's very difficult. You have frontline workers that need the teabag machines need to run. And you have a marketing individual or a customer service individual. And so there were 2 different worlds we were balancing, which was actually hard for me because, we sort of try to run the organization based on fairness. And there was already something that was not fair. And I had to wrestle with that, to be honest. So we were sensitive, and obviously I'd like to think we were sensitive in both cases. We heard every case. We allowed the employee to do what they needed to do. Obviously no one was going to lose their job over that. It's interesting, it wasn't just females. We actually had males having the same issue, not to the same degree in terms of numbers, but it was really one-on-one, allowing them to do what they needed to do. In some cases, we were able to work with one of the organizations here in Bridgeport workplace, and they had services that were available, childcare services, etc. We already had a major childcare desert in the state. It only got much worse after COVID, but then help work with them to try to get them childcare. So again, small enough family business that we were able to sort of hopefully do whatever was necessary to help get through this pandemic. job security, and offering services when available.
Thanks. Cindi, anyone else?
Yeah, very, very similar. I think, at Medtronic, we have been working very hard to differentiate in the area of gender diversity, really hard over the last several years, investing and attracting, retaining, and promoting women. And, while we continue to advocate for women through various networks and employee resource groups, we have received feedback from a lot of women about how the pandemic burdens, being shouldered by women, and women of color in particular, is putting some of those gains at risk. Cindi mentioned childcare. It's derailing work days, even women trying to work from home with kids, bouncing around in the background. And everybody just really needed to be okay with that. But I think what it's presented now, when we are doing some surveys about return to office, right? Everybody's been working, but it's return to office. We have seen a discrepancy between our male team members who maybe want to come back to work more days per week, and the female who wants to maybe come back to work a couple days a week. So one thing that we are doing, in addition to what was done during the pandemic, right, where we offered childcare stipends and more flexible time and things like that. Going forward, I think a big thing we need to consider is a potential hybrid model. And leveraging that, because I think that's going to be the expectation, perhaps going forward. And from some of the articles I've read, is that our workforce is going to perhaps expect more flexibility with a hybrid model. And I think in particular, women will be looking for that. I think about when I was starting in my career, and my kids are older now, but when they were very young, I would have given my left arm for like a 1 day a week to work from home just to get some stuff done. So I think that's going to be a big part of the go forward plan.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that.
Maybe I'll just add, broadly for us at Otis, women represent more than a third of our executives globally and 40% in the US. So it's something that Otis takes very seriously and has been promoting and working through for a number of years. At the same time, we've just recently, committed to join Paradigm for Parity. We're the first in our industry, and it really goes to just our overall commitment to reach gender parity at the executive level by 2030. And I think this really kind of speaks to, like I said, sort of our culture, of being sort of the innovators in our industry and really committing to this, as I said, really on a global level. It's it just poses different challenges as you work, at the scale in the kind of countries that we operate in. And so I'm very proud of what Otis is doing. At the same time, I think, there's other things that we've done that I encourage folks to think about in terms of employee resource groups, mentorship programs, because I think, as we all say, it does take a village. And I think a lot of times, at least my experience has been, is these women tend to feel isolated. They feel alone in their challenge. Maybe they're only surrounded by men, and they don't see how to do it. They don't see the light. They don't see that there's a way to do it. And so, putting them into, situations where they can connect with others to learn about, okay, how have you done it? I'm a mother of 3. I'm a working executive. I travel globally. So I share my ideas with people, and I share my network with people, people, not just me who figured it out, but other people have figured it out. It's not easy. But giving people that network and those lifelines to, brainstorm and learn from, I think is critical for folks, even more critical right now for all the reasons we just described. So that would be my offer for folks.
Yeah, I think that point you made about isolation and really thinking that you're alone and nobody is going through what you've gone through. And I think that's why conferences also like these are really important. So you can hear that there are so many others, whether it's in your workplace or at other workplaces, that are going through similar challenges, and you're not alone. And I think as women leaders, I think, women have worked so hard to get so many opportunities in all different industries. And the thought of 1 year derailing a lot of what has been done over decades for, people whose shoulders that we all stand on, like, I think it just hopefully motivates us all as women leaders to really look at this issue in a deeper way than we probably did prior to the pandemic. And then, so Meredith, I want to give you a chance to also talk on this topic. I know you have two really young ones at home, and it's interesting, you being one of the leader at your company. And I'm sure everyone's watching how you are doing this and how you're handling it, and how that reflects in your workplace.
So we have a pretty strong manufacturing base. We're about 50-50 male and female for all the departments at our company. And what we found was things might not be fair. So we really tried to separate what was an effect of the pandemic on somebody's attendance or their performance versus what was something that was in their control. And we tried, on a unique basis to help people with those childcare issues or things out of their control, to be able to address them so that they could continue to work and feel successful, and we could continue to get what needed to get done as a company. And I had a lot of compassion because I was right there in it with everybody else. So I think that was a big lesson learned, just for helping people get through really difficult, unique situations, and understanding it was going to be different for every single person, how we could help them through it, but that we had to do it together. That was the only way we were going to get out of this. And on the manufacturing side, we did 2 shifts, which helped out quite a bit with a lot of the families to be able to work with their support network to have childcare maybe during these hours and not these, so that they could still work full time. But we chose to be flexible with the hours so that they could, do the schooling at home virtually, or find that childcare that was needed to do their job.
That's great. Anyone else? I just
want to add one thing and ask the other ladies on the panel here. For me, what was interesting was there was a greater awareness of the impact on women. So what does that mean? I've now heard stories for, we've had manufacturing. One of our shifts starts at 4 a.m. and these off hours where daycare isn't really available. And they used to literally have to wake a child up and bring them to the relative's house and then get here by 4 o'clock in the morning. What does that look like? And I think prior, to be honest, the pandemic, I was more like, okay, once you enter in the door, how am I creating the best environment possible for you, where you would feel engaged, respected, and we provide you with the proper benefits. Now I'm looking further down that journey to get into the door that I really wasn't aware of. Does that mean we have the solutions? We do not. But I'm working as part of the Governor Workforce Council, and the area I'm working on, it includes childcare. And when they talk about childcare, they're still talking about probably those standard hours. And what are we doing for individuals? Again, in my case, the manufacturing area, those hours are not always standard. So again, it's just a greater awareness. At least that's all I can say right now. I have a greater awareness, and I'm trying to think about, when we're thinking about solutions, I think more inclusive solutions than are currently on the table.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I think we all tend to look at things from our own situation. So we're thinking from the 9 to 5ers or what have you. But as you said, like, you have a workforce that you need to be inclusive of how it impacts them, right? And those who work the night shift or the evening shift, or those who have, are doing it all by themselves, perhaps, and as opposed to having, a spouse or family support systems. So definitely that inclusivity and that empathy is so important. And I think we've all learned that we perhaps can do a lot more and think a lot more about those issues. And this is a perfect segue into the topic of workplace culture and employee well-being. This year we dealt with the pandemic, the medical issue crisis, then remote work, the challenges and the newness of that for most companies. Then we had the social and racial justice issues full force right around the same time, and then also the political issues. So, you couldn't imagine a scenario like what we've just gone through, but with all that, it impacted all of our employees in different ways. All of those things impacted our employees in different ways, and it seemed that this was the first time that I can remember, at least, that employers had to actually really think about how do we deal with our employees' well-being? How do we make sure, to the extent we can, that they are okay, to take care of their families, okay, then to also continue doing the work of the company, et cetera. Like, we couldn't ignore it anymore. We couldn't just say, like, let's just look at what happens when they're in our walls, right? And how things externally are impacting them. Let's talk a little bit about what either you did with your companies or within the divisions that you run to deal with, well-being and addressing the fact that there was a lot going on, and none of us have ever gone through anything like this. Who wants to go first?
I can talk about a few of the things that we did, but again, most of the team members on my staff, and that group continued to go to the sites, right? Which presented, a different aspect. But the broader organization, they still felt good about what they were doing, continuing to manufacture and support health and life-saving products. But some of the other folks, right? I think the key things here were listening to the staff, right? And talking about well-being, right? Before, I've kind of been at this for 25 years, and we didn't have a lot of conversations just about how people were doing in the past. So I think one thing that's been brought, to the forefront is just having those conversations with employees about how they're feeling, how they're doing. And then also just providing the resources and the communication, that it's okay to not be okay sometimes, right? Because there were new stressors introduced that people hadn't had to deal with in the past. And then, I think we also did some training, right? There was quite a bit of unconscious bias training. There were statements from our company about kind of where that we stood as a company. That was made very clear to people. So that was helpful. Like, this is us, and this is where we stand on this issue. And that really, I think, contributed to people seeking to understand more. There were a lot of sessions around just having conversations with some of our resource groups, right? Whether it's our African Descent Network or our Asian Network or Pride or whatever, having those conversations about inclusivity and opening up the dialogue quite a bit more. And maybe for some of the office personnel, at least, all of the Zoom calls helped foster some of those conversations, I think, in a different way as well. So I think communication, enhanced training, and then just the dialogue around well-being were kind of the three focus areas for us.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think what you said is what a lot of companies try to do and implement. And I'd be curious too, also, yesterday was the anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. And I think a lot of companies, of course, at the moment we say, oh my gosh, we have to address it, your employees and your customers, and everyone's expecting you to address it. But now we're a year out, and going forward, do you see your companies saying, like, what, we are going to stick with this, and we are going to try and be part of the solution? Again, we all play such a tiny role in our world, communities, but in our workplace, like, we can do something. So is there any company that's trying to continue this post-pandemic, this 1 year anniversary?
Maybe Moy, I'll talk a little bit about what Otis has done. About a year ago, we launched a campaign called Our Commitment to Change. And I think what it did was really, on a whole scale effort, really, showed our employees, our overall commitment really and framework to ensure that really everyone felt that their voices were heard, that they feel safe, that their opinions were welcome, and had a voice in the company. And I think, to do that, we hired an expert in diversity inclusion to really come in and sort of assess our programs and look at, where our gaps were, help us understand some of the best practices that were out there, and really kind of helped us lay out, okay, what are the things you should do? How do you phase this in? And how do you really kind of put your money where your mouth is, so to speak? Kind of to your point, it's like one thing to, kind of create some communication, and it's another thing of how do you show action and how do you continue to show action? So I think, what's exciting to me is how Otis has done that. We actually, this morning, we just released our ESG strategy that starts to put some more commitment and teeth into that program. Talks about our investment in STEM as well, and really, helping to build that talent pipeline, across the organization for the future, or across the world, let's say, for the future. So again, I think it's some, it's not just kind of creating some thoughts around it, but really, how do you create some very strong commitments and hold yourself accountable to your employees for it as well.
Thank you, Robin. That's great. And I think also, I would guess in many of the companies, there's a lot of women who lead on those issues and have really been able to take their companies to a different level. So we should celebrate that too and continue that. So, all right, we're almost running out of time, but so I just want to do two quick questions with you. For what was your thing that you did during your self-care thing that you did during the pandemic? So we heard earlier that Wendy, it was the Peloton. What did you start that you're going to continue?
I started gardening.
Okay, nice.
It was wonderful. I'll continue that for a long time, I think.
All right. Anyone else?
I spent a lot more time with my kids and tried to start exercising a bit more. The good news is my dog lost 10 pounds. I did not, but my dog was a bit heavy, lost 10. So that was happening.
Anyone else?
Well, I've been in the office from day one, so my routine has not changed that much, to be honest. And the hours have certainly not gotten any better over the last year. So, I don't know, just for me, it's just trying to continue, trying to be mindful that I need time for me, whether it's that hour in the morning from 7 to 8 where I can either do emails or I can read whatever I want to read or practice my Spanish or whatever I want to do. Just really not finding time for anything new, but really just being mindful that I still need some time. I cannot let the business, I cannot let COVID consume me, although it's consumable. And so I just try to stay true to that.
Great. Anyone else?
Yeah, I feel the same way Cindi does. I think at the beginning of the pandemic, it did consume me, right? And so my routine did change. Instead of traveling all the time, I was at home, but I was on calls from 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. at night, so it felt all consuming. And so one of the things I changed was I began blocking time for me, again, even if it was to take a quick walk or, get a drink or something. But I think, just as you said, Cindi, making time a little bit for yourself to decompress, because I no longer had that drive or that flight that allowed me that opportunity to have some time to myself. And so, yeah, that would be what I would say.
No, and that's all great. So thank you for sharing that with the audience, because it's important. If we don't take care of ourselves, then we're not going to be any use to our businesses or our families. And we have to acknowledge and give ourselves grace and time to recoup. So we're going to end with one question from the audience, and it's perfect because we're all transitioning to this post-pandemic world. And the question from this audience member: for women who are now working from home and are still trying to build their career and grow, how do you ensure that you still are included in those big meetings, opportunities, et cetera? And when the physical work, it was already a challenge with the physical workplace to assert yourself. So how do you do that if you're not always in the physical workspace? Or just any tips, closing tips that you all could share with our audience?
Yeah, well, one thing that several women have reached out to me, and they're just establishing kind of a routine, kind of one-on-one and mentoring. I think that's been impactful because it even if you were in different offices or different parts of the world, you didn't have to kind of be connected in the same room. I think one thing this has done is because our work hours have expanded a little bit. So those one-on-one meetings, I'm still having folks kind of reach out and establish those to make those connections. We've also done some virtual meetups. And so if you want to kind of put yourself out there and establish a coffee hour or a happy hour or something like that, I think that will kind of keep your network open as well. And I've seen a lot of folks doing that as an idea.
Great. Anyone else? All right. You all were wonderful. As I said, we would not have enough time. We could talk for hours, but you were great. And hopefully the audience got some great advice and motivation and inspiration hearing the three of you. So thank you to Cindi, Robin, Meredith, and Valerie. Thank you to CBIA for having us all. And with that, we're going to go back to B.
Thank you
so much.